Okay, what is going on, guys? My name is Alex, aka Haven Carryion, and today we're going to be talking about the new Evangelion deck, specifically Purple Evangelion, the Spear of Gaius. So, this is right immediately following after Nats, and Nats saw an insane influx of Evangelion decks to the point where it kind of took over, I would say, like 3/4 of the room. And Purple Evangelion, the Spear of Gaius, was one of the most represented as well as one of the most dominant decks in the Nationals meta, and seems to be the case for the foreseeable future. So, wanted to put out this guide just to give people, more of a heads up of, hey, this is what you can be expecting, and hopefully this guide can teach people A, how to play the deck, but also B, how to deal with the deck. And we're going to be needing this a lot now that we have online regionals as well as in-person regionals, so hopefully this is a useful resource for everyone. So, as is the case with all of my guides, this is just what to expect. We're going to go over some basic context, we're going to go over the pros and cons of the deck, we'll be going over the deck list or deck lists. In this case it's only one, and I'll explain why. And I always like to go over some card considerations, even if there aren't very many of them. The bread and butter is going to be our matchups and win conditions against most of the meta decks. And lastly, some additional useful info that I like to include in all of my guides, so it rewards people for, staying tuned with everything. This one is going to be more large-scale event related. But before we begin, just a heads up, I am trying to get a sense of whether or not people would rather see these guides ahead of time or after we get like dedicated event results. So if you prefer before, please let me know. Put that in the comments, because that is going to change whether or not I make guides prior to release or after release. Okay, so this deck comes at the dawn of a new era, a new season of Union Arena. We finally get to see the 2026-2027 season, which, from what we've seen from a lot of sets, now has a completely different design philosophy. So these sets now have a lot more packed in. We're seeing a lot of power creep, and more specifically, we're seeing a lot more consistency across the early, mid, and late game for all sets. And this is probably to do with the fact that the game is so inherently luck reliant that they're trying to make things consistent to the best of their ability. Now, that's not to say the game is going to be extremely linear, because that's not always the case. There are going to be some aspects of flavor to decks that will change how they play, but we're going to see more defined stylistic choices within each deck. So we're going to see more removal, or we might see more flood decks, and these are going to be very different playstyles. We're going to see multi-attack versus crowd control, so things like yellow sleep versus red double attack, or in some cases triple attack might even be a thing. And as this progresses throughout the year, we're going to be seeing that the power creep is much more apparent. Some current sets just simply outright destroy and make irrelevant old sets. But the nice thing about this is that as more sets are developed, either through multiple volumes or new sets that come in already very strong, we're taking larger scope of meta. And so right now, I would say we're kind of in like a triangle meta where there's really 3 super relevant decks that kind of go in against each other. And I'll go more into this through the matchup section as well. But I actually believe over time, in Union Arena specifically, power creep is actually going to help become a more multifaceted meta, because there's just so many IPs, so many playable decks, that we eventually will see some very interesting results over the course of however long we have. And this is actually very apparent in the Japanese meta right now, where you have things like Evangelion, you have Arc Knights, you have Kingdom recently that came out, you have Kagurabachi, you have Tokyo Ghoul, you have Sakamoto Days that was already pretty good, you have Red Kenshin that's still viable, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's talk about Spear of Gaius. Right now, in the Western meta, this deck has way too many pros. It objectively has the strongest high-end unit in the Western meta by sheer utility, has the best searcher in the Western meta with AAA Wonder. For those who don't know, Wonder is a card where it on raid has force block, and when it dies, lets you search the top 5 of your deck and pick out 2 cards of 5 cost or higher, and you just add them to hand. There's no discard involved, which is very atypical of searchers, but even better, there is no restriction on what the card is outside of its cost. So you can pick up the special, you can pick up raids, you can pick up non-raids, doesn't matter. The deck does have a very heavy emphasis on cheating bodies. Specifically, your 7-cost Spear of Gaius raid gets to cheat extra non-raid bodies, and this can happen every turn, and this is extremely oppressive in the late game. The deck has access to both ramp and pressure, so you have a lot of double energy and a lot of ways to curve into it, but you get the early game pressure from the Force Block Wonder, as well as, if you're able to, push out some 6-cost 4K units with some utility. And as is always typical of really, really strong meta-relevant and recent deck designs, we're seeing a lot of good draw, especially with this deck. We have an absurd amount of draw effects. The 6-cost Asuka has a draw, 7-cost Spear of Gaius has a draw, 3-cost Masato has a draw, 3-cost what's her name? 3-cost Mari has a draw, Shinji has draw filter. Like, it truly is just an egregious amount of draw now. And we have a really, really large number of active triggers. Now, the active triggers part, a lot of people don't or may not see as a big pro, but you have to understand from a defensive perspective, active triggers are the difference between blocking with a body that will die versus blocking with a body that stays on the board. And so your board presence is somewhat alleviated and even pushed further, because now you don't have to refill that board slot. Over time and over the course of multiple active triggers and multiple turns, that becomes extremely oppressive. Even though this is the best deck, in my opinion, the best deck in the format, there are some cons to it. Otherwise, this would truly be a tier 0 deck. Number 1, it relies on specific curves to avoid awkward situations. And now I'm sure a lot of you have come into these scenarios, especially with decks like Green Lancelot or Purple Toguro Brothers, where your energy line has a scenario where it's like, okay, I have 5 energy, my energy line's full, but these are 6 energy units. I can't push because I would need a double energy to fill that slot, which means I have to raid to hopefully get that pushed unit out, or otherwise I would have to replace a unit with the double energy slot, right? So it gets kind of awkward, and there are a lot of cases where sometimes with this deck you'll just AP draw for the sake of just giving yourself an extra turn and an extra draw to try and get yourself out of these situations. Secondly, this is a 4 removal deck, and historically 4 removal decks have not done very well in our Western meta, primarily because, you know, if you don't have removal, you're just going to get out pressured on the board. Not the case here because you have so many body cheats, but even still, 4 removals means that there's a lot of key units that you just can't take out unless you have the special in hand. Third, there are very few raid options. We'll go into some alternatives here, but generally speaking, you're only going to be playing your Wonder Raid and your 7-cost Spear of Gaius raid. To some, that might seem like normal. You're just going to have 8 raids, but keep in mind your 4-cost Wonder is meant to die, right? So we have raid options that aren't inherently supposed to stay on the board outside of just the 7-cost Spear of Gaius. And lastly, this deck does seem to have very little defense outside of triggers. We have 4 natural 5Ks, which already is pretty good, but are probably going to die immediately by a special trigger or a special from hand. And most of your units don't have a defensive buff. Your Nullify Impact Shinji is a 3K on your opponent's turn, so it's not that hard to kill. It also comes into range of some really awkward effects, like minus 3k BP is very easy to do. And Nullify Impact, while really, really useful and can be looped, doesn't actually matter if you don't have a board anyways. So it's kind of conditional on the opponent playing a heavy impact deck, where if they're a multi-swinger deck, you're probably just sitting there praying that your triggers are useful. Okay, so here's the base deck list that I am showcasing, and I call this the base deck list, and I'm only going to show the base deck list because we'll talk about this near the end, but there's a lot of small micro adjustments you can make, but the base deck list is typically what you're going to be taking to an event. We see the traditional 4 draw card, discard card, 0 costs. We have the 0 cost Masato. Typically 500 BP units are not that useful here, but it is not only a raid target, but also a buff, so it's kind of useful in this specific scenario. You have the 0 cost Mari, which is a 2k active trigger, 0 cost. That's a fairly traditional unit to have, just as early board pressure and the active trigger. The alternative, of course, is the other 0 cost Shinji, but I personally don't like that Shinji. I think it's not that useful in this deck, and you already have so many Shinjis. You have the 1 cost Masato, which grants a unit with 5 or more required energy, impact 1 or damage 2. This is actually a really, really important card in certain scenarios where you just have to find a way to close the game, and sometimes you just gamble on the impact 1 being the game ender. The 2 cost Shinji, as is usual, a 2 cost that's just double energy when it stands or when it's active. 3 cost Masato and 3 cost Mari are the MVPs of the 3 cost range across all of Western Union Arena meta, in my opinion. Masato lets you basically mill out a Willet card from your hand into sideline to draw an extra one, so it's great filter, but more importantly, the Mari Makinami Illustrious 3 cost unit is a color trigger, double energy generator, is a Willa card, so that means it's not wasted if you have multiple in hand because you have the Masato. But the effect is so good, and it's so criminal to me how there were so many people who weren't playing this card. For those who don't know, the Mari's effect can only be activated on the turn the character is played. Choose any Willa affinity card on your field, and it gives it, when this character is not blocked, draw 1 card until the end of the turn. Note, this does not say only one effect can be active on a card, so you can stack this on a single Willa card. So there are a lot of cases in the early game where you can just play 2 of these, put it on your 2k 0 cost Mari, and if you can create a way where it's just a free swing in, you just went +2 for curving correctly. People don't seem to realize and appreciate how good free draw is when it's free draw placed on an aggressive option, right? It's very different from when you just get draw 2 for free, but when you get to do draw 2 for free and take a life, that really swings the efficiency factor to your side. And in my opinion, and you can probably ask a lot of people, Union Arena is all about efficiency, so this is really, really important. 4 cost Wonder, like I mentioned, the best searcher in the game, hands down, no questions asked. If you disagree, I'm sorry to tell you, you're just objectively wrong. 5 cost Shinji, this is the double energy generator with nullify impact, and during your turn, if you have a 5 energy or higher card on your field, it's now a 4k. Very solid on the offense, especially in the late game where you can swing 4k but also have a nullify impact to fall back on. And part of the combo in this deck is that you can loop this Shinji with the 6 cost Mari, but we'll get there. 6 cost Asuka, really, really solid. It's just a 4k that turns into a 5k on attack. When played, draw a card. Obviously, you're going to cheat this card out because it is a 6 cost non-raid. Therefore, you're just essentially cheating out and drawing a card. It's a cantrip. All cantrips are broken. 6 cost Mari Makinami Illustrious. When attacking, discard a card from your hand. Play a Shinji that's 3 costs or less from your discard into the board. Now, something that's important. The 5 cost Shinji here, the Nullify Impact Double Energy, counts as a 3 cost when it's in hand or sideline. So you only need 3 energy to play it from hand, and you only it is a legal target for the 6 cost Mari to bring from sideline because it's considered 3 cost. So in actuality, your deck plays way more 3 cost units than most other decks, which lets you curve kind of efficiently, but like I mentioned before, does come with those awkward situations sometimes. And lastly, the star of the show, Evangelion Test Type 1, Spear of Gaius, the 7 cost. When you raid it, or sorry, inherently has impact 1 on a raid. When you raid it, draw a card, cheat out I believe any purple character card with 1 AP cost that is not a raid onto the board. And the best part of this card, its activate main literally lets you do the when play again at the cost of popping one of your frontline units. So you can just play a random like throwaway frontline unit, activate Spear of Gaius, pop it, draw a card, because drawing a card is part of the when played, and then play another 6 costs to replace that popped card active. So it keeps up the offensive pressure while still giving you enough card draw to sustain your hand. Now, there's 2 things you'll notice. Number 1, you have a whole bunch of 3-cost units and a whole bunch of double energy. Number 2, you have an absolute buttload of active triggers here. Generally speaking, this deck plays very defense board heavy with a lot of body cheats and a lot of energy, which means you don't need finals, in my opinion, nearly as much, which is why you'll see here the final trigger here, you got it, is at a count of 3. For those who are curious, in my Nationals deck list, I actually dropped this to a count of 2 because I went even further and thought that the final was absolutely not worth it. We can't drop it to 0 because you want to rely on final trigger off life, and you need that, like, I think it was like a 4% chance of it happening at some point. Having this card decrease actually does open a lot of more interesting ratios for you, and you don't really need the final to cheat out more bodies because, again, you're keeping up board presence. And lastly, the 5-cost Spear of Gaius special. Now, this is a special that is 5 cost, so people might be wondering why it's not the traditional 4 cost. The reason is this card inherently has draw 1, discard 1 in its text. It is a special that lets you draw 1, discard 1. Really, really efficient, because usually you would need to play a unit for that. Guess what? You don't need to spend the 2 AP, you just need the 1. So again, very solid card. Now, the reason I call this the base deck list is because almost everyone will start off to some degree looking at this list and then making adjustments afterwards, the same way I did. There are some people who would take liberties to change up the deck list in really strange fashion. For anyone playing the 3-cost Kaworu color trigger, you're doing it wrong. But, you know, I'm not going to showcase my deck list for Nats, not because I want to hide it, it's just that the only difference was final trigger and Mari, the 6-cost Mari, and honestly, like, there's no point in doing a 1-card difference showcase. So one of the card considerations that an express group of people brought to Nats this year was actually playing the 5-cost Mari raid, so EVA Production Model 8. And this card, when played, is a draw 2, pitch 1, so you're going net 1 on hand, and has an effect where it reduces BP every turn. That 1k BP is the difference between being blocked by a 5k versus going over a 5k, because it's now 4k. The key benefits here are your draw advantage, obviously, the activate main effect, of course, bypassing 5k, but also having more raids in the deck typically gives you more options of offense when you don't hit the perfect curve. So in the base deck list, you need to get 7 energy to really feel fully efficient, right? The 4 energy for Wonder is great, but at the end of the day, your offense is going to hinge on whether or not you get Shinji out, or I should say Spear of Gaius out. When you play a different raid that's more mid-range, it gives you the opportunity to play the game aggressively, with pressure, with potency, without having to rely on a hypothetical pipe dream. And so that's where this Mari comes into play as well. Of course, there are some downsides. So number 1, it requires more raid targets for Mari. The base list runs 4 0-cost Mari and 4 double energy Mari. The double energy Mari you probably don't want to raid on top of, so you're most likely going to be relying on the 0-cost Maris, and there's not very many to rely on. The effect is partially wasted because the activate main gives you essentially bonus BP, but you're never going to get to that point because you don't have any other effects that will reduce BP to 0, as that is the condition. And lastly, the playstyle of the deck, this might not be a downside for some people, but the playstyle of the deck is very, very different. right? You're no longer trying to rely on Wonder for early game and Spear for late game. You are effectively putting 2 eggs, or you're basically just not putting all your eggs in one basket, right? The 5 cost curve is much more reliable to hit than the 7 cost curve, but as a result, you may or may not inherently have to make the decisions to gimp yourself of the 7 cost curve by just playing the 5 cost curve and waiting an extra turn. And that extra turn does matter. For those who don't believe me, there are lots of cases where you might just look at the game and think, man, next turn I had game, right? So those 1 turns always matter. This change to the deck may or may not change the playstyle, and as a result, may or may not change the curve. Okay, so that was the only card consideration. Thankfully, we can keep this a little short, but we're going to go to the bread and butter now, which is the matchups. Now, I want to point out that these matchups are specifically what we saw at Nationals. In case you haven't checked what that spread was like, it was essentially just 6 decks. And I know that sounds not so promising. There is a reason for that, and we're going to get into that, but in the future, we're expecting more. So my apologies, there's not going to be very many matchups here. Number 1 is Red Kenshin, and this is actually the Nationals winner. So Red Kenshin did take home Nats amongst a sea of Purple Spear, and there's a very good reason for that. As is typically the case, this deck wants to go hard, force early aggression, gain a quick life lead, and try to whittle you down as fast as possible. You should feel compelled to block early, as there is no body loss when they win combat unless they have the 4/2 Kenshin on the board. Now, the reason that this deck is so good and was so popular in this Nationals was because you get so many double swings and so many multi attacks and so much rush that Evangelion decks couldn't quite keep up with that pace, right? So some of the ways that you can mitigate this: Wonder's force block effect is very useful when they early raid and only have 1 Kenshin in the front, or like they make the mistake of only having a single Kenshin when the Kaorus in the backline rely on Kenshin to generate double energy. So if they ever leave units alone, that Wonder raid is going to be beautiful. This deck only has 4 removals. Granted, they're bottom deck removals, so it actually renders Wonder useless, but it's very difficult for you to actually see it consistently, especially when you're removing cards from hand to aggro rush or to double attack or whatever it may be. Since those specials are the only way to reliably remove 5k bodies and the nullify impact Shinji, there's only so much they can do with against your board pressure. You're kind of always flooding the board, so as long as you're able to keep up your own game plan, chances are Red Kenshin won't be able to match your power level. So the biggest tip I give is try and get 2 7-cost Spear of Gaius units on the board. Having 2 of them means that they need to see 2 specials. Each one of them can block an attack from a 4k Kenshin, and it forces them to find their pushback rate to push the Spear of Gaius back. But if they're pushing Spear of Gaius back, that just means next turn you're going to come back in with 5k impact, and you're just going to keep flooding the board over and over again. So it's very difficult for them, again, to keep up with your board pressure. Just make sure you want the 5ks as early as possible. The next deck is my personal least favorite deck of the Kenshin and of the current meta sets is Purple Saito. The one thing that I will always say about Purple Saito is that the deck loses momentum very quickly, and it's the kind of deck where we're going to go ham for the first 3 turns, or first 4 turns. Afterwards, we're going to have a really difficult time playing the game because either A, we didn't see what we needed to see, B, we already committed all the resources, or C, we don't have enough energy to do anything anymore. Wonder here is therefore extremely debilitating because Force Block clears every single one of their raids. They do not have a natural 5k, and if you time it correctly, the Force Block essentially renders their offensive pressure completely useless, and if they can't find the next follow-up raid, the game's over. One thing to note, it is always more useful to use special triggers on the 4-cost Hajime Saito, as it's a null impact, and null impact is, for this deck, is more annoying to deal with than impact 1 because A, we have 5k bodies, B, we have nullify impact units. But again, this is more based on whether or not you have to prevent game ending or you just want to try and end the game yourself. One thing to note, and my tip against this deck, you're almost always going to have a better hand advantage in this deck after turn 3. So if your deck does draw much more passively than they do, you're eventually just going to outscale them anyways. Okay, so now we're going to go into Red EVA matchups, and the EVA matchups as a whole. This time we're just going to talk about the theoretical matchups for Red EVA, as we didn't see very many of these. At least I personally didn't get to see many of these, but here's how it goes. So Red Evangelion, what I'm going to nickname as the Bomb Evangelion, is a really aggressive deck with multi-removal built in, with a 6-cost raid, and that multi-removal also gives you draw. So it seems really weird to use a raid as a removal unit, but the When Sideline ability gives you hand advantage, and it makes your Shinjis cheaper, so technically it gives you back board advantage, or at least recovers board disadvantage. So you're able to play relatively efficiently. What you want to do is take advantage of using all the smaller Willow bodies and buffing them with 3-cost Mari so that they get the draw effect, and you're just going to swing in, try and chip little by little. One thing to note with this against this deck is because they're popping their own units so frequently, they probably don't have a full board. So if you just keep going, slam, 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 next turn, slam, 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 slam. At some point you're going to keep chipping. At some point you're going to get some draws out of it. You're eventually just going to be able to out-resource them. One key thing to note here, the 7-cost raid seems really, really threatening as well. It requires 4 Ray Ayanami cards on the sideline. The way it works is when you play the card, it takes 1 Ray Ayanami from each energy bracket and puts it underneath this card. Every time it attacks, it takes 2 of those cards underneath it and puts it to hand, which means, if you've been doing the math here, it can attack 3 times. The last attack being the most threatening, as it is now a 10k body with impact 3. While this seems really, really tough to deal with, it does take a lot of time to set up. It's a 7-cost unit in a deck that doesn't run as many double energies as we do, so you're probably going to have a little bit of time to play around. And last little tip against this deck, please remember, impact 3 simply means when you block, you're going to take 3 damage. You can choose to not block it, and if you do not block it, you're only going to take 1 damage. So do not block this unit unless you have Nullify Impact. Okay, third of the Evangelion new decks is Yellow Evangelion, that I like to call the ladies deck. Not because the ladies play it, it's just that it's all the wife cards essentially. It's a non-standard deck that does not play raids, so we've seen this before, and instead focuses on restanding the units. So the main engine in Yellow Evangelion lets you take the units with get triggers off your life and play them onto the board for free. The most notable thing about this deck is that all the units on defense are 4k bodies, which means a force block with Wonder, again, is really, really efficient, and this is why Wonder is so damn good. The only caveat here is if the 4-cost Ray plays the 2-cost Ray, because that 2-cost Ray gives plus 1k, so technically on defense it would be a 5k. In this matchup, getting enough draw is super important. You need to be able to see multiple 7-cost Shinjis, because the 4-cost 2 AP Asuka is most likely going to pop it, right? So as long as you play your unit, they're going to play theirs, they're going to blow up your Shinji, and you're going to be left a little sad. So always make sure that you have at least 2 in hand before you play 1, as this ensures a steady stream of frontline pressure. This deck and these units in general have very little to rely on for closers. In fact, the Asuka is the only one, I believe, that gets impact, and it requires you to mill 2 from your own hand, so it's a 5k impact conditional on going down on resources. So if you save your special for Asuka, and you always just pop it when you see it, chances are they're not going to be able to do enough damage by the end of the game. You can even go ahead and do like 2 7-cost Shinji raids, 1 Mari, and 1 Nullify Impact on the board, and every time they swing, you'll block 2, you'll block 1 with Nullify Impact, so no impact, and then you'll just take 1 life. In return, you're swinging guaranteed 2 damage with a 4k Mari on top of it, right? So it becomes really one-sided over time, and that's why Yellow Eva really relies on just rushing you down hard and winning the game, whereas for you, once you get to the late game in this matchup, you're basically winning the game. The last one we're going to go over, of course, is the mirror match. And unlike most mirror matches in Union Arena, which I personally just hate all mirror matches. This mirror match is somewhat interesting because it really relies on who manages their tempo better. So early aggression and using Wonder is super valuable, especially in the early game when they raid first. I always like to just wait on Wonder and just use all my small cheap chump blockers, and once they play Wonder, I play my own Wonder. So that way I will have better pressure at the end of that turn. They'll probably find their 5 cost, 6 cost raids, but the following turn I'll do the same, right? So you end up getting a 1-step advantage on the board pressure. And clearing board presence and getting life advantage in this matchup forces the opponent to have a response right away. If they ever whiff the response, you're essentially up and you're probably going to win. In the mirror, 3-cost Mari is really, really strong because when you get the force block off AAA Wonder and you have any other Willy card in the front, there are certain curves and certain times where they're only going to have the 1 unit, which means your 3-cost Mari gives you your free draw when it chips a life. I've actually had multiple practice games where in the mirror I lose my only front line and my opponent is able to swing with 0-cost Mari and draw 3 cards because they stacked 3 of the Maris together. If that ever happens, my condolences. That matchup is unplayable at that point. This leads to the point where hand advantage is really, really important in the mirror, and if you're able to find your 3-cost Masato or multiple 3-cost Maris, that puts this matchup in your favor, especially the Masato, as it's a backline unit that cannot be targeted or disrupted. Now in this mirror, there's a lot of situationally niche interactions you have to work out, and one of them is the 6-cost Mari. Sometimes specialing the 6-cost Mari or removing the 6-cost Mari is better than removing the 7-cost Spear of Gaius, because in a hypothetical endgame loop, both players will have a Mari to loop their nullify impacts, and they'll have a Shinji to swing impact, right? The Shinjis are always going to trade. The 7-cost Shinji will kill the 5-cost Shinji, nullify impact is going to occur, nobody takes life, and that body is just sent into the discard to eventually be brought back, right? So to prevent a stalemated loop, you shouldn't be killing the Spear of Gaius, you should be killing the Mari, especially because so many decks are pretty greedy and don't run very many of them. This is actually why in my Nationals list, I play 3 6-cost Mari and 2 finals instead of most people playing 2 6-cost Mari and 3 finals, because I put more importance on the 6-cost Mari being able to loop the nullify impact more in the mirror. And that's all we have for matchups. I know this seems like very little information, and my sincere apologies, but given the spread that we saw at Nats, plus the future sets coming out, for those of you wondering, the Kagurabachi guide will be coming out soon. I just didn't feel the need to add more matchups. I just felt like it would just drag the runtime, and realistically isn't going to be that useful in 90% of your scenarios. So instead, I put a little bit more information into the additional info section, which is a somewhat relevant discussion on how to prepare for larger events. So for those of you who are going to regionals, and I pray that you guys do, or for those of you who are playing online regionals, because now we have that option, this should be good information for you. So the first point is when it comes to adjusting ratios, right? Decks should always be flexible and adjust based on what a player is expected to see in a tournament, right? So in my case for Nationals, I was expecting to see a lot more Purple Eva and probably a couple of aggro choices to try and break through Purple Eva. As it turned out, that was exactly the case. We saw like 3/4 Purple Eva, or like something absurd. I think it was like half the field was Purple Eva, and then the remainder was like every other Eva, and then Red Kenshin, Purple Kenshin. That was it, right? With bar like a couple small niche decks here and there. It may feel counterintuitive to adjust your ratios for certain situations, but oftentimes is very necessary. So for example, I initially, for my Purple Eva list, started with 3 Wonder, because I found that this was not a card that was that useful in the late game. It was more in the early game to set up your curve. However, when we did testing, when we saw matchup analysis, I realized that the force block pressure was entirely necessary in the mirror match as well as Red Kenshin. So we had to adjust, or I had to adjust and change the list to be a 4 Wonder list. In a similar vein, the finals and the 6-cost Mari, like I mentioned before, in the mirror match, I had more success playing with the 6-cost Mari than having more bodies on board or more AP available for the final trigger. And a lot of the times, you'll probably find this out when you play this deck, your board is always full. There are often times where it's just like, okay, I'm just gonna AP draw and play one body, and now I have one AP standing because I have nothing else to do, right? So with that in mind, I adjusted my ratios, reduced my finals, increased my 6-cost Mari count, and thereby having a little more consistency in the mirror matchup, right? So this kind of thinking and like forward planning is super necessary when going into large events, especially ones where you can read the meta easily. Now we're going to go over what I call one-to-one replacements. Certain cards in every deck can be considered replacements, whether it's by its inherent categorization or by their use case. So for example, every IP has multiple color triggers in a single color. Usually, each color will have 2 color triggers, and they're more thematic to certain deck archetypes. Also, every IP has multiple cards that can accomplish similar utility or crowd control, right? Everyone has a 0-cost draw 1, discard 1. Everyone typically will have double energy plus some sort of buff on a 3-cost unit. And everyone almost always has a raid that either is very good offensively or very good defensively. Given all of these potential options to replace certain cards within lists, you have to look at the broader picture of how a deck is played, how a deck gets to its win condition, and make the appropriate one-to-one changes when you see these things fit. The key example I'm going to put here is 3-cost Mari versus 3-cost Kaworu. Okay, both of them are color triggers, both of them are double energy, both of them are 3-cost, and both of them are 3k battle power. So the only thing that matters now is the text on the card. Kaworu has 2 things. 1, a unit gets plus 500 BP. 2, a resting Shinji can be switched to active. Now, the first effect, sure, there are certain cases where this can be useful. Plus 500 BP lets you get over certain thresholds. But the second effect doesn't really matter in this deck, right? Choose one resting Shinji and make it active. Sure, I guess that can apply to fake 2 energy Shinji, where it has to be active to make 2 energy. But outside of that, there's no real use case for that part of the text, so the card itself is only half efficient. Whereas Mari, while the condition is only Willa characters, it gives you draw on all the Willa characters you play, which is a majority of your deck. So from a one-to-one perspective, yes, they are replaceable, but one is so very obviously better for the use case of your deck that it is a no-brainer to play 3-cost Mari Makanami Illustrious, which is why I say it's criminal that there are so many people who got away with the 3-cost Kaworu, personally. The last little thing we're going to talk about is what I call the meta call. Certain sets obviously have the potential to include or exclude certain cards that may drastically change how matchups against other decks work. So this is what I was talking about with the 5-cost Mari raid. We have now an option that changes how your deck is played, changes how matchups work, changes how your deck is composed. As a result, even though it's the same card, even though it's the same set, even though it's the same IP, and the same color, it actually completely drastically changes how you play the game, right? So making these changes and making these meta calls for what is or isn't good, given, you know, what you're expected to see in the field, is really, really necessary, and sometimes makes a lot of difficult decisions happen because it requires a combination of one-to-one replacements and adjusting ratios. So for example, in this scenario, if you're going to be playing the 5-cost Mari raid, you're unfortunately probably removing all your 6-cost Maris because, hey, we now have a different high-end Mari to play. There's your quote-unquote one-to-one replacement. And as a result, because you need more raid targets for this Mari, you're probably going to play different Mari raid targets, and as a result, don't have space for your 3-cost Masato draw engine. So you're probably going to adjust the ratios and remove your Masatos, right? This is something that you have to over time get used to, as, hey, I see this deck as super popular in the meta. I have this one card that will completely thrash how my deck works, but is really, really good for what I think is in the meta. maybe I should consider playing it, right? So if you're going to do that, just please keep in mind, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a bit of a headache to figure out like what actually works and what doesn't, especially with the nature of Union Arena. Sometimes, like even with these correct meta calls, you're going to be really unlucky, but stick to it. Try and figure out what works for you, what works for the deck, what works for the meta, and make those changes accordingly. Okay, and that's it. That's all I have for you guys today. Much shorter guide, thankfully, because the matchup section was really short. Every section was much shorter, but thank you all for watching. Again, I'm always open to feedback. Let me know if this helped or if it didn't, because all of your comments, all of your suggestions help form these guides over time. Again, if you prefer that guides come out before deck lists and sets release, please comment down below. Let me know this. That way I can cater my schedule and my guides to be more useful to you and what you guys want. Okay. Small closing thought here. Nats was an incredible time. Bandai Card Fest was so much fun. Really wish I got to perform better. I did not make the top 16 cut, unfortunately, but one of our friends piloted this deck very, very well, made it to top 16. He actually got the last chance qualifier to make it into the main event in the first place, so he actually had like a full weekend worth of games to really learn the deck in and out, so really proud of him for that. I'm hoping this upcoming year is going to be filled with a whole bunch of cool, interesting sets and neat mechanics, and probably some power creep that's kind of unavoidable at this point in time. But hope to see you guys all in the upcoming set of regionals, and if I do, best of luck. If I don't, that's fine. Your support here means everything, so thank you guys. Have a good one.